everyone. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple. And tonight I am very happy to welcome you to as we celebrate Karissa Chen's debut novel, Homeseeking. Let's give a hand. Excellent. She is joined tonight by Green Apple favorite Vanessa Hua. Let's give Vanessa a hand. Our first week of events for 2025, and you all have all made it very fabulous. I love seeing a packed house. Thank you for showing up for literature and for good books. We appreciate you so much. We open each of our events with a land acknowledgement. We are broadcasting from San Francisco, California. We are operating on unceded Homeseeking land, and we encourage you, we think that acknowledgement requires action, and so we encourage you to donate either your time or monetary means to an Indigenous organization each time you hear a land acknowledgement. If you'd like more details about the Homeseeking Land Trust, which is usually where we direct people, you can check out the details that we have at the back desk. This is particularly prescient, I think, as we think about the ongoing wildfires in Southern California and the indigenous stewardship that has historically helped protect our wildlife. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention the wildfires going on in Los Angeles and those displaced from them. I'm sure it is in the front of a lot of people's minds. So I want to let you know that our fellow bookstore here in San Francisco, Medicine for Nightmares, is holding a supply drive this weekend. I have a flyer at the back desk. Please take a picture of it if you want those details. So you can drop off supplies anytime at Medicine for Nightmares. They're on 24th Street between Treat and Harrison. Down there, and they're looking for N95 masks and first aid supplies, tampons, pet food, a lot of different things. Please do take a look. This is an opportunity to give to those who have lost everything, those who are unhoused, those who are in limbo. So I know it's probably at the front of a lot of people's minds. So it's in the room with us. It is okay, and we can still enjoy our night and celebrate great literature. So thank you for being here with that. Let's see, brief housekeeping, and then I will let these two take over. Now is a good time to silence your cell phones. If you have not already, please do so. Picture taking is fine. We got the go-ahead, so please do snap photos of our authors. We love to see them. Just don't take a call in the middle of the event. That would be super embarrassing. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event that you are currently attending. The restroom is behind me. It is available after the event and not during the event for others. If you need to know how to get there, do let me know. I will gladly help you. And we have copies of books at the front register by both of our authors at the front register. You can find them there. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you also support the writers who put so much work into making these books. And then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. And they'll sign copies, I imagine. They are gonna sign, which is pretty great. What a treat. So think about that as you go about your business in the bookstore after the event. Without further ado, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Vanessa Hua is the author of the national bestsellers A River of Stars and Forbidden City, as well as Deceit and Other Possibilities, a New York Times editor's pick. Her work has appeared in publications including the New York Times, Washington Post, and The Atlantic. She teaches at Warren Wilson MFA program and other places. She is the daughter of Chinese immigrants and lives in the San Francisco Bay Area with her family, and her novel El Nido is forthcoming. Let's give one more hand for Vanessa. And last but most certainly not least, Karissa Chen is a Fulbright Fellow, Kundiman Fiction Fellow, and a Vona Voices Fellow whose fiction and essays have appeared in The Atlantic, Eater, The Cut, Guernica, and other publications. She is formerly a senior fiction editor at The Rumpus and currently serves as the editor-in-chief at Hyphen Magazine. She received an MFA in fiction from Sarah Lawrence College and splits her time between New Jersey and Taipei, Taiwan. Her debut novel, Homeseeking, was not only just announced as a January Good Morning America Book Club pick, but it is out now from G2 Putnam and Sons, and it is the reason we are here tonight. Let's give one more hand for Karissa.
Well, thanks, everyone. I think Karissa is going to treat us with reading an excerpt.
Yeah, okay. This is not the first chapter, but the beginning of the first chapter after the prologue. January 2008, Los Angeles. A chorus of violins ushered Suchi into Howard's life for the third and final time. Mozart's Violin Concerto No. 5 in A major, celebratory and elegant, floated out of muffled speakers in the 99 Ranch Market, its golden jubilation incongruous with Howard's mood, the blank haze of gray he'd been living in since he buried Lin Yi 16 months earlier. He glanced up from the bananas he was inspecting to search for the source of his irritation. Instead, he saw her. She was picking up Korean melons, their skins the color of lemon curd. He watched her knock on them with her knuckles, her head bent to listen. Howard was sure it was Suchi this time, but he had mistaken so many women for her over the last 4 decades. Women with cheekbones like hers, gaits like hers, but who transformed into other people when he approached. He stood transfixed. This woman's face was plump and sagging. Her hair was thin and gray at the roots, but her eyes never changed, he had once heard someone say, and hers, caramel and bright, were every bit as intense as he remembered, even in the task of selecting the ripest melon. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly in Mandarin, and she glanced up. Her eyes widened. "Wang Haiwen?" The name came out carefully, more a statement than a question. For a moment, he couldn't respond. He was a child again, a teenager again, not in this American supermarket, but in the alleyways of their youth. He gripped the handle of his shopping cart, feeling the bite of plastic where it was uneven. "So it is you," he said. "Wang Haiwen," she said, more briskly this time, a confirmation. She smiled, revealing teeth too straight and white to be real. He pulled his cart alongside hers. His, empty aside from 3 bunches of bananas. Hers, already filled with various greens, tomatoes, a box of Asian pears, and a daikon radish. "You live here now?" he asked. It was a dumb question. He didn't know what else to say. "I moved in with my son and daughter-in-law a couple years ago," she answered in Shanghainese. A jolt ran through him. Howard had not heard his childhood language in several years, and it caused in him an aching relief, the sensation reminiscent of a sour candy his granddaughter had once given him. "They said they needed help with the grandchildren," Suchi continued, "but to be honest, I think they worried I was getting lonely, living all alone." Howard understood that loneliness. Each morning he woke up to an empty house and expected to hear Lin Yi in the kitchen, pots clanging, a mug being washed, a soap opera keening on the television set. Instead, he heard nothing but the breeze in the trees, or a lone pigeon purring, or the neighbors mowing their lawn. "And you?" Suchi asked. "Have you lived in Los Angeles long?" "We've been here for about 30 years, Howard responded in Shanghainese, then inwardly revised. "Not we anymore. I." Suchi's eyes grew soft. "And your wife?" Had he become that transparent? Did every thought of Lin Yi paint itself across his face, whether or not he wanted it to? "Lin Yi passed away a little over a year ago," he said quietly. She murmured a sound of condolence. She reached out and touched his arm. He stared down at the back of her hand, at the age spots dotting her dark blue veins. One splotch of chipped coral polish remained on her pinky nail. He remembered she'd had beautiful hands once. "Pneumonia," he said in response to the question she hadn't asked. "But really, Parkinson's." Suchi retracted her hand. "I wish I could have met her," she said. "I would have liked that," he answered, and they both said nothing for a while, letting each of their kind lies mingle and hang in the air. Suchi broke the silence. "You must love bananas." She looked pointedly into his shopping cart. "They help with digestion," he said, with mock defensiveness. "I recall you having an extremely efficient digestive system." "I don't know about you, but things don't work quite as well as they did when we were kids. Getting old has been a disappointment."
Suchi laughed, full-bellied and open-mouthed. Her laughter sounded exactly as he recalled, like spring rain upon glass. "It's so nice to hear you laugh," he said, and immediately regretted the sentimentality of the words. "And it's nice to see you, Haiwen." "People call me Howard now. Easier for the Americans to pronounce." "Howard," she pronounced slowly. "Not so easy for a Chinese person to pronounce." "And yet, even my Chinese friends know me as Howard." "Wasn't that the name they gave you at that missionary school? I thought you hated it." He was surprised. Even he'd forgotten the origin of his English name. "I couldn't think of another one," he said. "Now I'm used to it." "Lucky for me, my name is easy for Americans. Many people just call me Sue." She shook her head and smiled. "I must be going now," she said. She plucked a melon from the mountain before her and made a show of wrapping it. "You should buy a melon. They sound promising." Howard was pulling the car out of the lot when it occurred to him that neither of them had asked for the other's contact information. He wasn't sure if he was relieved or sorry.
Yeah, I loved that passage, how tenderly you portray them. Also, who doesn't love Ranch 99? Although I'll call it Ranch 99 and not 99 Ranch. I don't know. We can take a poll. So I wanted to ask, maybe for those who haven't yet had the pleasure of reading this book, maybe you could talk a bit about sort of like the premise of these two lovers meeting, the whole panorama of their lifetime, and sort of what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah. So the book is about these two childhood friends, Haiwen and Suchi, and they meet in their Shanghainese neighborhood during the Sino-Japanese War. And they grow up, they become best friends, they grow up together, they fall in love. And before they have a chance to really move forward with that relationship, the Chinese Civil War breaks out. And so Haiwen, he joins the Nationalist Army, and they are separated. One ends up in Taiwan with the army, and then the other ends up in Hong Kong. And they reunite again in their 70s when, which we just saw in LA. So the book really kind of spans 7 decades, and it's told in alternating points of view, with one timeline going backwards in time and one going chronologically forwards in time. Yeah, and you were asking about the inspiration.
Oh, inspiration.
Okay,
Yeah.
The inspiration. So the genesis of the book really came in 2005, actually. Shortly after my grandfather had passed away, and we were going through his things, and we found this photograph of him like crying in front of my grandmother's grave. And my grandfather was like a typical Chinese man, right? Like not particularly vulnerable with his like sad emotions. I had never seen him cry. So it really like moved me and it broke my heart to see him crying. And he was crying in front of his mother's grave because he hadn't seen her since he was 19 years old. He had gone to Taiwan shortly before the communists took over China, and he was never able to return. He was never able to, or like he was able to return eventually, which was, that picture. But by the time he had returned, his mother had passed away. So I was so haunted by this image of like, I just couldn't imagine being 19, basically a child still, and leaving your home and everything and like your mom. And then by the time you go back, like you have a family, like you're older and, it's too late. So that was really when I like really wanted to research the context for that. And that's how I found out like, oh, like his story wasn't unique. There were 2 million people who fled from China to Taiwan at the end of the Chinese Civil War. A lot of them were military, but a lot of them also weren't. There were several that were not, like my grandfather. And every single one of them, they had their stories. They thought they were going to go back in like 5-6 years, that they would regroup and keep fighting. And so they left behind wives, children, parents, lovers, like all manners of people that they cared about, entire homes. And they were never able to go back for like decades. And so that's kind of like how this book came about.
Yeah, it resonated with me in terms of thinking of my own family history. I think many of us in this room might have similar stories too that in some ways our elders were maybe even silent about because it was so painful and they thought, let's just move forward, let's just build this life. I mean, and that's what always strikes me when you're walking around in Chinatown, the grannies with their sharp elbows, they've got stories, right? Like you don't write them off. You don't, and that's what impressed me so much about Homeseeking is how you were able to really excavate like that person in Ranch 99, like so many stories in their lives in that whole panoramic sweep. So, but to talk about on a craft level, like, did you write it in a linear fashion? Did you always know, like, you mentioned how there's a timeline that goes forward, another that goes back. How did you keep track? How did you write it? Like, how did you assemble? I just want to know. Tell me your secrets.
So I had no idea what I was doing, right? First novel, no clue what I was doing. I did not write it linearly. I had like written, the part I just read was the first thing that I wrote. And I wrote it thinking I was writing a short story, which is not clearly. And, I wrote the first like 100 pages, like feverishly, and it was like the parts where they met. And then I like got trapped at 100 pages when I realized it was not a short story anymore.
It's just a novella.
I know. I was like, I did like trick myself into believing it was going to be a novella for like from pages 40 to 80. I was like, okay, it's a novella. We were still in novella territory. And at 100, I was like, oh no, this is not a novella anymore. And like, the moment your brain like is like, I'm writing a novel, I froze. I was like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing. So, I was writing these like disparate chapters, like things that just whatever was like interesting to me at different parts of their lives. But I didn't know what the structure was. I didn't know what I was doing. And I'm someone who really needs a structure to be able to have a shape and have a like understanding of what I'm even trying to write. And so I was really stalled for a while. And I was at this writing residency and like, it's a 30-day writing residency and like every day was ticking by and I had written nothing because I didn't know what I was doing. And I was listening to a lot of music at the time and I was listening to Jason Robert Brown's The Last 5 Years, which if you know it, it's a musical that is about two people who are getting a divorce. And the musical starts out with the woman singing about the end of her marriage. And the next song is the man singing about his first date with her. And they alternate like that until it ends with him singing about, the end of his marriage and her like having a great first date. And they meet in the middle when they get married. And so I was listening to that a lot. And at some point in time, I was like, wait a second, I think this might work for this book because not only does like it work with the existing things that I had already written, but also it felt like it worked very well thematically with what I wanted the characters to be doing, like
their view on life.
Yeah, their view on life, exactly. So like, one character is very backward looking and he's kind of like always like thinking about like, could I have done something differently? And like really wanting to hold on to these memories and not be able to really move forward. Whereas the other character, she's kind of like, we don't think about the past. We just got to keep going because the past is too painful. I just got to forge forward and that's how I'm going to live. And so that worked really well, like thematically. And so I kind of tried it out and I was like, wait, this really works. And after that, it was like full steam ahead. I kind of knew where I had to go from there.
Did you have like a big dry erase board? How did you keep everything, like track of everything?
I use Scrivener.
Oh, okay.
Which is great because you can like create separate files, but all in like one big file.
Yeah.
And so I just made like separate files with like the name of each year that I was going to do. And I would move them around and I would like delete things or like you can make different folders in the same file too. So sometimes I would just be like, all right, I'm going to move this like down to this folder and just like the cuts folder and just like, let me see how it looks if I take this out. So like, love Scrivener. This book would not exist if Scrivener didn't exist.
She is not sponsored by Scrivener. Although it does kind of, I was curious, are there any sort of like, I don't know, sections that ended up on the cutting room floor, other POVs, other...
I got so many. Yeah. I even like, there are, even in like the editing process with my editor, I ended up cutting out 2 chapters, two or three chapters, and then one of them I replaced with a new chapter. There were like chapters that were from different points of view. Like there's a chapter with like the father that I kind of took out, and like I think maybe I'll use it as a short story someday. I don't know. So yeah, there were definitely like a lot of like thousands of words that I took out. It's sad. Yeah.
Yes. It sometimes you gotta like swim through it all to get to the end.
Totally.
So, well, I also I understand you went on a Fulbright to Taiwan. Did you go with an intent of researching for this book, or I know there might be people in the audience who are curious about how that works, and when you did that and how that eventually ended up in your book, if at all. Yeah.
So I went on my Fulbright in the end of 2015, and I had at that point in time like already started researching the history of the people who had gone from China to Taiwan. I was doing like a lot of like academic research and like doing like research on articles online and stuff like that. And so I went to Taiwan with the intention of interviewing like those old soldiers who had fled and like hearing their stories. When I got there though, people were like, you are 10 years too late. Like they are all in their 90s.
They're dead.
They're either dead or they're like senile or like, you know. And so it was like kind of too late. What I ended up doing was I talked to a lot of people like in the next generation, so like their kids, and just to like find out like what was your dad's deal, and like how did that happen, and wanting to know, and that was like a valuable perspective too, because like they had their in some ways like I feel like if I had interviewed like these older people, like they may not have opened up to me, right? But like the next generation, they were kind of readily able to be like, yeah, like when I was in my 40s, I suddenly found out that like my dad had like a whole nother family that he had left behind. And like suddenly he was like, I'm going back. I'm going to like live with like my old wife and like my older kids. And like they were like, what? And so like that was really like an interesting like process in itself. I didn't actually start writing this particular book until 2017. I was trying to, like, I knew I was interested in this history, but I just couldn't find the right, like, creative vehicle for it.
Entry point, yeah.
Yeah, I was writing, like, short stories and stuff like that, but I was like, I don't know how to make this into, like, a novel, and,
Tell yourself you're writing a short story.
Yeah, apparently that's a trick. Everyone just tell yourself you're writing a short story.
So this is not totally germane, but did you go to Love Boat, or?
I did not. I never did. Sad. I like really want.
Yes. For those of you who may not know about Love Boat, it's the government on Taiwan to sort of engender goodwill around the world, brings in people from the Chinese diaspora, and
like a heritage trip.
Yes, with like nightclubs and sleeping over
called Love Boat.
It's
for
called
reasons.
Love Boat. Yes, I remember I arrived or like learning, there is no boat. But that kind of brings me to the question of diaspora, which I think you so beautifully portray in all its complexities in Homeseeking, and just wondering if you could talk about sort of maybe your own interest in diasporas, what it means to you on a personal level, and how it functions for you as a sort of creative inspiration.
Yeah. I think like being someone of like Chinese and Taiwanese descent, like I didn't know a lot about my history. I did seek out, I feel like from like a young age, I did seek out like other Asian American faces. Like I was like, I want to be friends with you, like Asian person, the only other Asian person in my school. Because I felt like there was something fundamentally different about my experience, and I wanted to share that with someone. And as I've gotten older, I think I wanted to understand more about sort of like the historical stuff behind that, because it's stuff we don't learn in history class. And, part of like, for me, like part of my writing life has been, being part of a diasporic like community, like an Asian American diasporic community, like getting to know other Asian American writers, going to things like Kundiman, like it's been so important to me, because I think we're all sort of searching for our creative voice, but we're also searching for it in like the context of like who we are and how do we present ourselves and how do we understand ourselves, right? Within the context of this country, within the context of our family histories, and then how do we like write about it? I think it's also been complicated for me once I moved to Taiwan, because like everything I thought I knew about being a Chinese person, a Taiwanese person, like all that was really complicated once I moved to Taiwan. And, you know, there's a completely different understanding of identity there and like hyphenation. You know, like one of the things that I really struggled with when I first moved to Taiwan was like, oh, like this thing that I think I am, which is like a Taiwanese Chinese American, hyphenated like twice. It's something that increasingly doesn't exist in Taiwan. People increasingly just think of themselves as Taiwanese American, which I very much empathize with and I understand. But it wasn't my personal experience growing up. And so wanting to understand that was like its own sort of complication. And I think just like, yeah, so I think in general, just like the diasporic forces of like, what is the things that have pushed communities to go to all these different places, there is so much trauma behind it, and it's something that like we all have to like reckon with in our own ways. And you know, that's something that I think I've been trying to understand through my writing for, you know, as long as I've been writing. Sorry, I feel like that was a very like long-winded circular answer.
Well, but there's no other way to put it.
Yeah.
Or just so I understand, you were getting your Fulbright in 2015, and you thought, did you come back in between, or when did you decide you were going to start being by country?
I did not decide.
It was decided? Or?
It just happened because I kept pushing off. Like, so I thought, you know, the Fulbright is 10 months long. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go for 10 months. This was like on my bucket list. I was like, before I get married and settle down, I think I was like 33 at the time. I was like, before I get married and settle down, I just want to live in Taiwan once in my life for like an extended period of time. Because I'd gone for like short trips and I was like, this place is awesome. Like, you know, my like family history is from here. I don't know that much about it. I just want to live here to like really experience it and, you know, have that experience before, you know, I am like saddled with kids or like whatever. So, so I went out there, and then when it was over, I was like, I'm not ready to go back yet. And I got like a teaching job out there.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm still not ready to go back. So like, I'll just renew my teaching contract. And people kept being like, are you coming back this year? And I was like, yes, soon, probably this summer. And then like summer would come by and I like just wouldn't move back. So yeah. So then, and then COVID happened, and then I got married and I had a baby. So now I'm just there.
Both places. Well, and it was so interesting during the pandemic. I knew several people who moved to Taiwan. So like there is this often this notion, or like sort of an old notion of immigration as being one way, but now can be very circular.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. Yeah. I think of myself as like a reverse immigrant. When I moved out there and like just like didn't decide to say that, but like, you know, have been there for a while. My mom actually said to me, she was like, your grandmother would find it so funny and ironic that like the place she tried so hard to leave, you decided to just go back and live there. And I was like, oh, we have healthcare there.
We're like, it's different. It's different now. Yeah. So, and yet you're able to, how do you sort of keep up with writing community, and also you're editor-in-chief of Hyphen? How do you sort of manage the time zones?
Oh my gosh. I take a lot of meetings at really random hours. Yeah, you know, I think we're really lucky, like, to live in this modern world, at least, you know, where you can have community through, you know, email listservs and like social media. And like, you know, I have so many friends that I met through social media. Like some of them are here. And like, you know, being able to do things over Slack and I don't know, whatever. So like, it's not as hard as like I would expect. And plus until I had a kid, I was a night owl. So I was like, oh, totally. You want to have a meeting at 2 a.m. my time? Sure, I can totally do it.
Right. Or like realizing like, maybe I've been living in the wrong time zone.
Yeah, I was like, this works for me. Like, yeah.
So back to the book, I was so curious. You decided to, in the different, you know, so it's set in Shanghai, Hong Kong, Taiwan, San Gabriel Valley. and the names changed, as you sort of indicated, not only, Ranch 99, but also you chose to represent their names differently in different dialects. And then also you included footnotes. So I'm so, again, interested on a craft level, what made you decide that for these characters, is this how you wanted to sort of honor their experience?
Yeah. I mean, one was just like a practical thing, or like it felt realistic, right? Because like if you understand like the Chinese language, like Sinitic languages all sound different, but you can read the same character in like different ways. So like just practically, I was like, well, of course, like if they're gonna move from some place that speaks like Mandarin to a place that speaks Cantonese, like they're gonna be called something different. Like that is just part of it. And like because I'm writing this book in English, like I have to like represent those names. In fact, I had thought about this. I was like, if my book got translated into Chinese, in fact, it would be less faithful in terms of trying to represent the difference.
Because the character would be
the character would be the same. So like, but whereas like in English, it's something I was like really intentional about. I was like, this has to be faithful because this is part of their experience, is hearing their names differently. And if you think,
having to get used to it.
Exactly. Like if you think about like, yeah, like your identity is so tied up in your name, right? And like moving to a new place, like you have to get used to responding to that new name. Like I'm called Karissa. If you suddenly start calling me like Caitlin, like I wouldn't turn around. But like that's what these people had to do. And like that is such a like a representative part, like one small part of what it takes to have to move to a new place is getting used to a new name. Not to mention like having to get used to a new language and like a new culture and all those things. And so like for me, the other part of it was like, yes, I know this might risk alienating some people, or it might be challenging for some people, but I was like, this is a story about people who are disoriented, or about people who are immigrating and like constantly having to navigate someplace that's new. Like, if you have never had that experience, then you're actually extremely privileged in this world. And so this little bit of discomfort and this disorientation, like, I feel like people can afford to have a little bit of that, right? And like, imagine what it must be. Like, this is like a 500-page novel. It's a little bit uncomfortable, maybe a little bit confusing, but imagine if that was your everyday. And I really wanted to be able to represent that disorientation faithfully.
Yep. And you did beautifully so. Another thing that you portrayed so movingly in the novel was music. Haiwen Howard with his violin, and Su Chi with singing, and do you play any instruments? Oh, I have seen you sing. You know how to hold the mic professionally in karaoke. So, but just what was it like to write about music? How did you know it was going to be such an important part of the novel?
I did not know that it was going to be an important part of the novel. I'm someone who like, the characters reveal themselves to me as I'm writing. And so at some point in time, I realized that Haiwen was going to be a violinist. Like I was writing, and, he's in the courtyard and like, what is he doing? And I was like, oh, he's playing the violin. And suddenly it made very much sense to me because, music is something that when you hear a particular song from a particular point in your life, like you're immediately transported back in time, right? I hear Baby One More Time, I'm 16 again. I know exactly like who my crushes were, like, all of that. And I was like, for a character who is so backwards looking, who cares about his memory so much, who's also very interior and, needs to make sense of the world in a different way, music seemed like it made a lot of sense for him, right? As a way to understand the world and as a way to express himself. And so like, that was sort of like, the way, like the genesis of it was just like me being like, oh, that like it popped up and it made sense. And then it just became an integral part of the book.
Do you know how to play the violin, or how did you pull off like portraying it?
I asked violinist friends to like, fact check the stuff I was writing. I also watch a lot of like two-step violin, which I don't know if anybody knows.
Wait, the Arhu? No.
No, they just stopped, but they were this like comedy duo. They're like these two Asian guys who like play the violin professionally, and they would just create these like music, like these videos on YouTube that were like comedic, but they were aimed at trying to bring classical music to like a younger generation, because classical music is often seen as like stodgy and older. And they were like, no, like we're gonna make it more accessible to younger people. And so like they would do all these like really funny skits and stuff about classical music, but they just ended and it was really sad. But there are my acknowledgments.
There is everything online.
Yes.
I also wanted to talk to you about the beautiful relationship between Suchi and her sister, and then also the complicated relationship Howard has with his, or Haiwen has with his brother and his sister, and how it's, you know, it gets warped by the historical circumstances that they're in, and just how you went about sort of figuring out how to balance how the sort of that sweep of history with like the intimate manifestation of like the fallout in the relationship.
Yeah. You know, I think that like, to me, what is interesting about history is always like these small moments, right? Because like, yes, we see in the history books, like this big thing happened and it affected however many thousands of people, but like behind every big historical like moment are, you know, thousands of heartbreaks, right, that we never see. And I think that is what is interesting about them. You know, it's not these statistics. It's like, how does it affect these people? So I knew that like what I cared about were the relationships. I wanted to be able to portray like how these historical things affected people's relationships. Particularly, I mean, I don't want to give it away for people who haven't read it yet, but like, yeah, particularly like
read it.
Haiwen and his siblings, because it's very complicated when you are a nationalist, you're labeled a national soldier that has like left, but you have family behind, right? Like how do the communists treat the existing family, and what does that mean for them? And so that was something that I wanted to try to portray, even though I knew I was like, I can't capture the entirety, the enormity of what that means and the fallout for that, but I wanted to at least try and like give it, you know, acknowledge that that was something that happened.
And yet what I think the novel so impressively conveys is, I mean, I've seen the beefs between my aunts and uncles. They start in childhood. Like, and I mean, we get a chance to meet these protagonists from, you know, 6-7 years old. And like, what was that like to be able to convey the span of a life?
It was fun.
Yeah.
It was really fun, right? Because you can like imagine how somebody like changes from when they're like little, or like what are the things, you know, like I have a 2-year-old now, and like some things you're just like, oh, like that is essentially who you are. Like you were born like this, you know, and like how that like continues up until like they're probably, I mean, he's only 2, but I can imagine certain traits like continuing until he's an adult. And so like that was kind of fun. But then also at the same time, like imagining the ways in which like external factors might sort of change some of that, or cause them to express it differently. So I really enjoyed being able to follow characters like that deeply and for that long.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think birth order is also really fascinating. I'm a middle child. But it is interesting how your experience of your parents, or say for your characters, like is totally different depending on what age you were in that part of the parent's life. And I want to open it up to audience questions, but I just had another question about Haiwen's mother, who I think I read an interview was a favorite of yours because she's like a picture of elegance and grace, and and she sort of plays an important role toward kind of gathering everything for our understanding. But what compelled, why is she one of your favorite characters?
You know, I liked following her because I feel like the first time we meet her, we see her through these 2 young girls' eyes. And so like there's this very idealized version of her where she's like beautiful and elegant. And, you know, it kind of reminded me of like when I was a young girl and I had like girl crushes, or like I was like, oh, I want to grow up to be just like that. And it's very idealized. And then as the novel moves on, like we get to see her through her son's eyes, right? Which is slightly different, right? You see your mom in a different way, like where you're like, yeah, she's kind of my hero, but also she's really annoying sometimes.
Yeah.
And like she becomes a little more human, but then also like this is a person who like comforts you, right? She's not just this idealized figure, but like somebody who you turn to for comfort. And then at the very end, we get to see her from her point of view, right? And the ways that she thinks that she has failed, the very human ways that she feels like, you know, as a mother, she wasn't good enough, or as a person, she wasn't good enough. And like, I just really enjoyed being able to kind of present this very idealized person and sort of like slowly revisit her in different ways. And I feel a lot of empathy for her, as a mother who has had to deal with, living with her child being a question mark and not knowing what happened to her.
Well, I know there's a lot of people here, warm audience. Would anyone like to ask the first question?
Yeah, thank you for coming. Sure. I want to go back to your research process because I'm in the middle of reading, and I think what struck me is just like the specificity of detail, even though it spans like so many decades, so many different locations. So I'm curious to know a little bit more about it and like what was helpful, I think, for getting so much detail, and then also like what was the more challenging aspects of the research.
In terms of like getting detail down, I started this thinking like I don't have a right to write this. I don't who am I? I don't know anything about that time period. I didn't live through that time period. How could I portray it accurately, right? And I felt a lot of anxiety over it and insecurity over it, which I think led me to then do a lot of research because I wanted to make sure that I got it right. I read a lot of academic books and articles because thank God for the scholars. They do so much work, but there's a paper on everything, you're like, what was school like back then? There's a paper on that, what was the neighborhood like? There's a paper on that. So I did so much research just in terms of academic stuff. And then once I felt like I had enough and I started to write it, I tried to forget about as much of it as I could. I tried not to think about am I getting every single detail right? Because that will totally paralyze you. There was one point in time where I wasted probably half a day because I was my character is at a bar and he's going to drink a beer in Hong Kong in 1965. What was a popular beer brand? And I spent literally half a day just looking up beer brands. I was trying to figure it out. At a certain point in time, I was like, this is not important. He's going to drink whiskey. It's fine. And so I think that is the balance, right? It's yes, you have to do enough that you feel confident about writing, that world and feeling you have enough ownership, and also acknowledge that you're a fiction writer. You're not going to get every single thing right. I know there's probably things I got wrong. There's probably anachronisms. I'm sure a person who lived through Shanghai in the 1930s will read it and be like, none of this part here is wrong. And that, I'm a fiction writer. I'm not trying to be a historian, as I try to do my best. And that's all you can ask for, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's impressive. But another way to frame research that I've always thought is it's the floor, not the ceiling for your imagination.
Yeah.
So
I mean, you've done that too. Your books are very heavily researched too. Your last book was really heavily researched. So, and yours is even more impressive because she brought him out, and I was like, wow, I mean, I thought that was amazing too. It's yeah.
But also JSTOR is awesome.
Yes, JSTOR is amazing.
Yeah. Charlene.
Hi, I just want to congratulate you. I feel so proud of you and just so honored to have gotten to sort of track you through this journey of the book, but also your journey as a writer. I wanted to also thank you. You mentioned the 2 million people who of this part of history who were displaced, refugees, had left and fled mainland to places like Hong Kong and Taiwan. And in my family's history, the part that I connect to is primarily the large percentage of people who did go to Taiwan. And I feel that when you were posting on social media that you were working on this book, I was so grateful because I realized that, and I may not know the works that are out there, but I feel that there are so few works in at least the English language that are the stories, are in literature, stories about people who are from this history in this very liminal space. And my friends and I who do share this background, we feel 2 million people isn't that many people ultimately, and that their stories are dying with, for sure, my grandparents' generation, they've passed on, and my parents' generation, they're getting older, it will be gone with them. Mm-hmm. And so then it's left with us, and then many of us who have children, they are just that much more far removed from it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like you said, that sort of hyphenated, this idea that we have a history in Taiwan, but we're not Taiwanese, right? I personally don't think of myself as Taiwanese, and I know it's, we've had conversation around that in terms of, because there are people who are Taiwanese who identify, therefore mothers and fathers came from Fujian, and they speak Taiwanese. Me and my family, we don't speak Taiwanese, and we don't identify that way, but we are Chinese from mainland. We are Waisenren, outer province people, because we're not from the quote-unquote province of Taiwan. Very politically, right, and very fraught and complex. And so I try to explain to people in America, let's say, who have, many of them don't even know where Taiwan is from, where Taiwan is, let alone like this nuance.
Right.
They're like, so you're Taiwanese? Well, I'm not. And your family's from China? They are, but my parents grew up in Taiwan. So, first of all, thank you. So I was wondering, in your as a writer, did you come across literary works in English or even Chinese beforehand? And also during your research, did you come across other works? And then in general, just how that makes you feel that you're like contributing to something. I think that there's not a whole lot of this kind of work. And then secondly, what are your handles so that we can tag you to spread the word about the book?
So do you mean like in terms of other works having to do with this specific history?
Yeah, but in a literary form, not academic.
Yes, absolutely. So last May there was a book called Daughters of Shandong. It came out by Eve J. Chung, and it is about it's based upon her grandmother's story, also about women who came from Shandong and they were abandoned by the father's family and the patriarchal society. So the mom took her 3 daughters, or 2 daughters it was, and managed to escape from Shandong all the way to Taiwan in the wake of the end of the Chinese Civil War. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. There is Peach Blossom Spring by Melissa Fu. And it's also about people who have left, about a man who left China, and the man and there's several people who would move to Taiwan as well. I also highly recommend Last Boat Out of Shanghai by Helen Zia, which is nonfiction. It's very well researched about people who escaped China after the end of the Chinese Civil War, and they didn't necessarily go to Taiwan. I think some went to Hong Kong, but that is also a really great book. So those are 3 that come to mind. I'm sure there are a couple more. I mean, it is definitely not it's not like the wealth of books the way like World War II in Germany is or something. But I think there are. I mean, those books are all very recent. They all popped up while I was writing this book, and some of them appeared on my radar after I was already done with the draft. So they're very recent, but I am heartened by the fact that there are more coming onto the scene. I also want to say that even though this history is really important, I also think that as a addendum to that stories about the White Terror period, where the nationalists came to Taiwan and oppressed them and did horrible things, which was the flip side of this. I tried to make a nod to it, but because that is not the central point of this novel, I could only do so much. But I think that is also really important. And so there is a book called Green Island by Shauna Ryan. Oh, what's her name?
Shauna Ryan.
Is it Shauna Ryan?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that I recommend as a book about the White Terror period in Taiwan, which I think is really important also. Oh, and my handle on Instagram is Karissa Chen.
Okay. Lunar New Year's coming up.
Yeah.
Helen Zia, her mother lived in Rossmore in her final years. Wait, do people know what Rossmore is?
Mm-hmm.
It's huge, old folks community out in the East Bay, and just I don't know. Anyway, it's just the world comes home, right? Any other questions? Yes.
I'm curious, as someone also in the middle of writing a novel, how do you know when you're done? How did you know when you were done? Because you started in 2017, right?
Yeah.
How many drafts? Was actually scary of a question.
It's a terrifying question. It's
But yeah, was it gut feeling? Was it an editor friend being stop? How did you know?
So before I sent it out to agents, I knew I was done when I literally could not look at it anymore, and I thought I would like stab myself in the eye. Which I don't recommend actually, because you then have to look at it again many more times after you give it to the agent. I went through 3 more edits. Me and my editor went through 3 more edits. I did 3 rounds of copy edits, and then I did 3 rounds of pass pages. And so by the end, I was like, I shouldn't have done like before I gave it to my agent, I should have just like done less because yeah. But I for this particular book, it was like I knew which time periods I wanted to hit, so I knew that like these sections had to be completed, and then I just tinkered with those sections for like another 2 years until I just couldn't stand it anymore, and I was like, I'm done sending it out. So yeah.
Have you read it through in printed form?
No.
Yeah.
I'm here to say I finally got a copy of the audiobook, so I might listen to the audiobook, but I really don't think I'll ever read it again.
Honestly, I don't think I've ever read through any of my novels again. It's just, anyway. Because segue, are you working on something else?
I'm not.
Okay.
I am not. No.
Because I was going to say, sometimes you're done when you fall in love with something else.
No, I was done. I mean, I sold this book when I was pregnant, and then I was supposed to, my deadline was my due date, and I did not get it done on time, and I was like in labor, and it made my husband bring me my laptop from home because I had to like email my editor being like, I didn't finish edits. And so like I've been working on this book since like his whole life. And now I just really want to take some time to like be fully present with my child. So I think I'm gonna spend like a year to live, because I think living is an important part of writing.
Yes.
And then we'll see. We'll see if there's something else that sort of strikes me and like is more interesting enough for me that I am willing to do all of this again.
Memoir.
Well, I'm very excited for whatever comes, whenever it comes. Any more questions before we proceed to the speed round? Okay, yes.
Yeah. How recently did this book Homeseeking came out?
I'm sorry?
How recently did this book came out?
It came out on Tuesday.
Oh, just 3 days ago.
Yes.
And sales in the first week are very important.
Yeah, so buy the book, please.
Have the sales picked up?
I don't know, because you don't see the sales figures until like later. So yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much, Karissa, for your wonderful answers. But before I let you go, just a speed round.
Okay.
All right, there are no right or wrong answers.
Okay.
Ranch 99, 99 Ranch, or Dahua.
99 Ranch.
Okay. Yeah. Favorite karaoke song in English?
Oh my gosh. So I really like sappy love songs. So it's Someone Like You by Adele.
Oh.
Which you've heard me sing.
Yes. Again, she knows the mic, how to handle a mic. Okay, favorite karaoke song in Chinese?
Oh, good one. I really like Jay Chow. And I like Anjing.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay. Wade Giles, Han Yu Pinyin, or Tai Lo romanization?
Ooh, I might use Pinyin.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And final question is Bubba or Egg Puff? No right or wrong answer.
Can I have both?
Yes. Okay.
I choose both.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Can we keep it going for Karissa Chen?
Thank you, Vanessa.